It's just started, but it's important also for dissemination that if you cannot join for the whole time, or if you could not join in the end, they will be able to see the recording. This event will last around 1 hour, so we will first set the scene from the side of the POLIS and the SCALE project, and then we'll give the floor to our 4 panelists, Karen van Kloijsen, Aphrodite Stamelu, Rafael Helio, and Kanika Aurora. We will be both moderating the session. So basically, without further ado, I'm just going to present our speakers. So we have Karen van Kloijsen, Secretary General of the POLIS Network, and Aphrodite Stamelu, Senior Project Manager and Research Associate at CERT, Rafael Helio, Policy Manager at AVERE, European User Association, and Kanika Aurora from SCALE team at ENEDIS, which is a French DSO. And now just very, very briefly introducing what is POLIS and what are we doing here and why we are here. So we are a leading network of more than 100 cities and regions, and we work towards sustainable urban mobility. We are a platform for peer exchange, knowledge exchange, but also policy and advocacy. And together with research and innovation, we try to bring knowledge and we try to bring innovations to improve the way our cities move, let's say, and bring also more sustainability to the transport sector. It's a platform for knowledge sharing, but also something that we use to bring some topics to the agenda that sometimes are not as obvious. Like for example, today. So also we try to bring emerging and cross-cutting topics, like for example, the just transition, to ensure that no one is left behind when it comes to the transition for sustainable mobility. So we have a specific task force, which is the Just Transition Taskforce. We try to bring real action for this change, and this covers topics such as gender, persons with disabilities, the rural and urban divide, and we have set up a series of events and initiatives in the past, so this is kind of a continuation. If you want to know a little bit more about what we do in the Just Transition, you can check on the POLIS website. We have a series of webinars specific for the different topics that our working groups work on, and I do recommend that you check them because all of them are quite interesting. And going forward to the SCALE project, just very briefly, because also that's why we are here. It's a 3-year-old project funded by Horizon Europe, and it's about advancing and mass deploying electromobility through innovations such as smart charging and vehicle to grid. And when it comes to vehicle to grid, talking about, for example, being able to not just use your car to move, but also use your car as an asset to the grid. But this comes in many shapes and sizes. So this can be also in different use cases. For example, vehicle to home, vehicle to depot, vehicle to business, and vehicle to public. And we are addressing all of these approaches in 13 use cases in the Netherlands, in Germany, in France, in Norway, and in Budapest, in Hungary. So the idea is to test these different approaches and see how we can learn from each other and in the end facilitate the mass deployment of vehicle to grid and smart charging. This project is coordinated by ELAT, and AVERE and ENEDIS are also, and CERT, we are all partners of the project. I just wanted to say something on a more personal note. I wasn't very aware of this gender imbalance because, well, it was not something that was in my radar, but I was a little bit triggered by the first meeting, the kickoff meeting with the commission, where my colleague Juliette was attending, and she commented that in a room full of, I don't know, maybe 30 to 50 people, less than half a dozen were women. So this was kind of shocking, and this is actually what triggered me to be more interested in the topic. But I will let Juliette talk a little bit more about it.
Yes, so as my colleague Pedro says, this is a picture actually from that kickoff in Utrecht. And what we realized in SCALE within the gender diversity of our consortium, but also the events we attend, the partners we work with, the other EU projects we work with, is that there is a problem in terms of gender diversity in the workforce, specifically in land transport and in electromobility. And instead of just observing the problem, we decided in SCALE to be proactive. So we have been looking at the different tasks that we have to do within this EU-funded project, and to see how can we include the question of gender diversity, gender equality into our transversal topics. And this webinar is really the start, the kickoff of those activities. There will be some that will be public, but we are going to try to work a lot internally in our processes, in the research we're doing, in the partners we get involved, and more. So we are really excited to be going on to this journey. So before we invite our panelists to discuss, I wanted to bring a little bit the data, to take a step back. So we know that there's a problem, but to what extent in the transport sector? So first, data. Data can be quite complicated to gather because gender disaggregated data hasn't been collected for a long time. But the picture we have today is that only 22% of the transport workforce in the European Union are women. And in those numbers are also included many activities that are linked to the transport sector. So if we look at really more strict definition, these numbers are much lower. We also see that worldwide, only 8% of ministers working on transportation are women. And this is the lowest category out of all the cabinets that exist. It's the lowest. It's just before religious affairs. So this is really low. And in the EU, it's not that much higher. You can get the numbers of the EU on the European Institute for Gender Equality. I think it's something like 15% currently. And then there's also asymmetries in data. So we hear about different modes, and often I see that aviation is a sector that is shown as more gender diverse. But actually, if you look into the data, what roles, what kind of jobs are women and men having, it's very diverse. So globally, only 6% of pilots are women. But there's much more stewards or people that are in the airports that are working, that are women. And then because we're also working and focusing on electromobility, there's also something to look in the users. So who is the average user that is using electric vehicles? And in Europe currently, according to the IAFO consumer survey, it's mostly 35-year-old men, well-off, white-collar jobs, and you see a much lower percentage of women. And I don't want to speak just about women because there's also a question of intersectionality. So it's not just about gender, but about a variety of other factors that interlink and create different opportunities to access mobility services or modes. So in this webinar, we'll be focusing on the workforce, but we'll be also focusing on how this ties into the user and how this impacts the user's experience. Before we start, there's something that, to me, I find really important, and it's something that has been bothering me a little bit in the whole discussion about gender, is that we often say, okay, gender, it's women. This is a woman's job to make sure that the gender workforce is, that the workforce is more diverse. But I do believe that to really create systemic change throughout organizations, public sector, private sector, users, workforce, there's only one way forward. It's to get everyone on board. And I'm not saying everyone should have the same role, should have the same position, but everyone needs to get involved. And I really hope that in this webinar, we'll be able to reach everyone, and that everyone can find their space in this transition or in this change. So without further ado, let's get started.
Should we first launch the poll?
Oh yeah, sorry, forgot this very important part. We have a little poll for the attendees here. We wanted to have a little overview. So let me just
Here
oh yeah,
3 dots. Quizzes.
So the first question we had was, have you ever been to a meeting related to the transport sector where there were only men? So this is a question for men and women to answer. And we wanted to know, but this is a very visual and I would say the easiest way to see in your sector, if you're working in transportation, if this is, if the workforce is diverse.
And clearly we see a yes. either often or occasionally.
And those who'd say no, I would be quite interested to hear in the chat where you're working or what kind of job, what kind of organization you're working in. Okay, I think we can close this question, and we have a second question. Wait, share results. Is that?
You can stop sharing.
Okay. And then we have a second question.
Do you feel like your organization, and now this is a more personal note, is gender balanced? And this is like a yes or no. No middle ground here. So this seems to be a little bit more balanced, but still tilting towards the no.
And if you have any comments, feel free to write in the chat. We would love to read those later on in the discussion or after the webinar. We'll be writing a short news item on this.
But we have a majority of no's.
Yeah, almost 60%. Okay, let's get started. So my first question to the panel would be to find out a little bit about how did you get to work in the transport sector? Was it an intentional choice, or did you just land here? So I would like to find out about you. So whoever wants to start, maybe Aphrodite, you can start, or whoever else can take the mic.
Okay, thank you. Thank you everyone for participating in this gender equality webinar. However, as I can see in our participant list, most are women. So at this webinar, we have a gender equality. However, girls, we should bring men in force, as Juliette said before. No, only women in this gender equality webinars. However, as regards my travel, if I can say that, in the transport sector, my first eye contact with this subject is during my second year of the university studies, when a female professor in the field of transport engineering, and this woman was one of the few in Greece during this time in the transport sector. This woman began to unveil the details of the transportation in my mind. So I owe my engagement with the subject of transportation to a woman. However, it is worth noting that when we enter in the civil engineering school, at least in Greece, there is a typically 70-30 male-female student ratio. So also in the studies of the engineering sector, men are more than women. However, fortunately, in recent years, these are starting to change. However, we have a significant journey ahead of us in order to bring gender equality in the engineering and especially in the transport sector. So we should all work to do that.
Thank you so much. I don't know, Karen, Rafael, and Kanika, if you want to add also. Karen, you can go first.
Sure. Yeah, I kind of accidentally ended up in this sector, I have to admit. I've been in the transport sector since 1998 now, so pretty much my whole career. And I feel old now while saying that, but it was by accident. But once I became part of it, I was hooked, I have to say, and fascinated by the topic and stayed in it clearly. But it was not a conscious choice back then. Of course, I did apply for the position that I had first, which was in a Belgian Center for Mobility Management, mostly to work on communication, dissemination, awareness raising, education around transport, which was more aligned with my background, which was not transport specific. And through that first angle, I became involved in European projects and in European networks, and the rest is history. But I've seen the sector change for the better, but there's still a lot of work to be done. But my first European project, which was on carpooling back in '98, I was the only woman.
Thank you. That's wow. Also makes me think that I really started many years ago. Raphael, the floor is yours also.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first, let me start by saying that it's really refreshing to see that for once, you know, it's the other way around. I'm sort of the quota, if I can say, in this panel, and yeah, it's just refreshing because I don't think we see it that often in our sector. So it's nice to see that, you know, there are a lot of great women involved in the sector. How did I get involved in the sector? For me, I'm more of a policy, you know, guy, if I may say so. But right when I got to Brussels, I was really interested in, you know, in the sustainable transition, energy transition, and also the automotive transition. So I've directly gone into the transport sector, and also during my studies, even though it was focused on policy, I was already focusing on transport policy because, yeah, it always had, you know, sparked my interest. So always have been quite interested by the sector and how we could make it greener and also more sustainable in terms of all aspects, because sustainable is not just making it green, it's, as we're discussing today, also making it more accessible to everyone and more socially just. So yeah.
Well, speaking about users, as you just said, I was wondering, how do you think the underrepresentation of women in the transport sector workforce, so decision makers, but also in the field, in policy making, how is this impacting users, everyday users, and not specifically in electromobility, but in the wider mobility? Does anyone want to take on this question?
I think they're really essentially two sides of the same coin. If our workforce is not representing the reality or more equality when it comes to the representation of men and women, then also we see that mobility needs of women, specific mobility needs of women and diversity of other groups are not properly taken into account. We make up half of the population, but when we talk about mobility needs of users, very often we end up in the vulnerability category, and that's something that I really feel strongly about. You know, we have these vulnerable categories that we need to address and that we need to talk about. But to put women just next to children, older people, disabled people, no, we are sometimes one of those or several of those, but we are 50% of the population, and we have different trip patterns than men have. We also have different needs. We see this represented in all kinds of things, like crash test dummies, which are the shape of men, which has an impact on how women are injured when there is a crash, for example, that they are exposed to higher risks. So it's really trickling down to the user level, the fact that we in the workforce also are not properly represented and accounted for. So this is really something that goes hand in hand.
Yes, Raphael?
Yeah, if I may comment on that, I mean, fully agree with what Karen just said. I think the workforce will have an impact on the users in the sense that the workforce, the way it is created, basically, you know, also has to reflect the population, just like Karen just said. One of the aspects, you know, that I think is key is that having more diversified teams actually brings more creativity within teams and, you know, bring greater representation. And in the automotive segment, it's kind of showing sometimes that the product that is created by a team sometimes does not reflect the need of certain population, you know, user population. And so one of the biggest example I've seen was a commercial in France from one of the big OEM, which, you know, was selling an SUV, and really the way they described it was, you know, it's made for the men, and it was really, you know, that strong language. And I was like, yeah, but you know, half of the population is women. We're not here addressing just you know, just men. And it's becoming as well, you know, it's not just an ethical question, it's also a business question. If you want to sell your products, you know, there's half of the population which can buy it. But like, if you're not creating products for that population, you're not going to be creating, you know, you're not going to be selling this product as well. So it's two sides of the coins. Indeed, it's making sure that your workforce can reflect the population so that you can, you know, make the most of your product and make sure that, you know, you're both answering the need of the men and the women on the field.
Having said that, shout out to the women not to buy SUVs, by the way.
Aphrodite, also have your hand raised.
Yes, exactly. I would also like to add that also in Greece, there is underrepresentation of women in the decision making. The decision making in the municipalities. However, me as a young mother, I have different trip patterns than a man. I have different needs when I was walking with a stroller or something like that. And when I see that there is no one in the decision-making process that is someone with same needs and same trip patterns like me, it's difficult to understand my needs and then go to take the decisions that will cover the needs of young mothers, if I can say that, new mothers.
Those are always very, very valid points, I think. And indeed, I agree, Rafael. It's not a very smart business decision to ignore off of the potential customer base. And I'm going now to mention a bit of my personal history. I'm an environmental engineer. So when I was in college, the proportion was one male student for each 3 female students. And I was lucky also enough to work in environments where gender was balanced. But if you look at my colleagues in university, like civil engineering, mechanical engineering, electrotechnical engineering, that actually go a lot to work to the transport sector, it was mostly male students. And I think this also then it's reflected in the way that the companies and the workforce evolves. So I wanted to ask you, if everyone wants to answer, if you have something to say on this, if this so it starts in university and then goes up to the workforce. So if this lack of representation in these fields that then inform the workforce of the transport sector actually also influence how women perceive this as a traditionally male-oriented industry. So it kind of a little bit of chicken and egg situation. But I wanted to ask you if you feel that lack of representation starting at college level, at education level, and then going up to the industry level actually actively contributes for having less women on the electromobility sector. Don't be shy. Aphrodite?
Yes, exactly. If as I said before, when we entered at the traffic engineering school, we saw that most of them are men. However, I think that at the transportation sector, when we discuss about the research part of this sector, our part exactly, it's more easier for women to enter this sector instead of the most constructual sector, because the latter one often demands irregular and lengthy working hours, which may be conflict with the increased responsibilities of women in the family or in especially in their life. So I think that the research part of the transportation sector is more attractive for women than the other parts, especially the most constructive one, if I can say that. However, we have very work that should be done in this sector. The positive part is that also in the university part, now there are a lot of women than previous years that are studying in the transport and engineering sector. So maybe we will see that in the next years.
Thank you very much. And actually, we have a student here, who just finished her internship at Enedis, working on scale, Kanika. I was wondering your hand is up. I was wondering how is it today? Like, how did you decide to do an internship in the transport sector? Is it something that you've, I want to say, stumbled upon? Is it something that you saw other women in the sector and you thought this would be something interesting to be part of? Tell us a bit about your story.
Hi, am I audible? Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for giving me this platform to speak today, and a very happy International Women's Day to all the women present here. So, as you mentioned, I recently graduated. So, I did my graduation in sustainable impact analysis. So, there I studied transport economics as well as subjects related to sustainability, which garnered some interest in me to go forward in this field. And thanks to a perfect match of my program director stumbling upon this opportunity, and Scale also coming up with this idea of involving a young woman, training her to engage more and more women in the electromobility sector, I stumbled upon this internship. And to my surprise, as everyone on the panel mentioned, that there is little representation, still little representation of women in this field. As I also saw in our Paris consortium meeting, most of the attendees were men. But to my surprise, when I worked at INEDIS and in this project, fortunately for me, I worked under a female manager. So she was quite supportive, and she involved me in everything. And what I saw in this organization, such a big organization, that for different tasks, like when we had the blackout also due to the storm in France, there were women also who were going on the field and helping with the blackouts as well. So in every different aspect of the organization, though little, but there still is representation. Initiatives like this that Scale also took, and organizations like INEDIS are taking, these are important, and it helps us make a difference. And that difference I could see when I was working over there. So these initiatives are quite helpful.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just before I pass the floor to Karen, your story resonates a lot with mine, because when I was a student, I did an internship with a female researcher from Sciences Po, Charlotte Halpern, and she made me work on she's helped me work on a project on transportation, and it was a field that I had never really even thought about. It's a field that I didn't even cross my mind. I was thinking of working in housing, in energy, but I didn't think about transportation. It wasn't in my imaginary. It's really crazy. And then once I got to work on one of the EU-funded projects, I was fascinated, and I thought, okay, I really want to work in this sector. So sometimes having a mentor, having someone strong, showing you, having representativity, I think it's critical, especially when you're a student and you're still finding your way around.
And speaking of mentors, Karen.
Now, what I wanted to highlight is one of the initiatives that a POLIS member has taken, and that's EMT Madrid, so the public transport company in Madrid. So they have established a Women in STEM chair in partnership with Iberdrola. And that's also to see why not more women, and identify the barriers for women to engage in STEM-related education, where we are still underrepresented. So I think that's a very important initiative. And also it shows how public authorities who employ people, women and men, can already also engage from that educational phase and make sure that women are better represented in those specific types of education and vocational training. So just wanted to highlight a good initiative coming from our membership, and how the public sector also is trying to make a difference and improve the representation of women in their workforce.
Yes, it's a very good example. And for more examples, we have worked on a Sum for All report on the gender imbalance in the transport sector, which I've linked in the chat. And we will discuss some of the findings further along in this panel. But it has many examples of good practices in the public, the private sector, and municipalities of all sizes. So if your organization or you would like to learn about what is being done out there at all the levels, so from hiring, from students, from evolving, also growing, putting women into leading positions, I would really recommend to have a look at this fantastic report.
I just wanted to step in also to maybe ask a little bit more detail on to Karen, because you mentioned EMT, which is a POLIS member, but for POLIS itself as an organization, we do a series of initiatives to tackle and address this issue. Can you highlight one for you, for example, that might be the the one that you feel it's the most important, or the one that you feel more proud about?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think within POLIS as an organization, as a team, we have a very good balance in terms of gender. So, and I'm very, very happy about that. What has also been very inspiring for me is to work with the younger generation who has been very vocal in terms of putting this on the agenda. If I look back at the past couple of years, gender issues and generally the just transition, referring to our webinars that you also mentioned at the beginning, have become a front and center topic in our work. And so it's about, you know, us doing something about it as an organization, but also raising awareness amongst our members. I remember the first gender session within the POLIS conference was in, I think, 2016. And there were like maybe 3 people in the room. It was like completely, you know, it was not successful. We also were facing the issue that, you know, we have a call for speakers, we have our members applying, and we saw back then in the public sector that it was largely a group of male over 40 representatives working on transport in the respective departments in cities and regions. So what we did back then was to make all moderators female in our sessions, because we felt we could not sufficiently reach that gender balance through the applications we received. We could have asked our male representative to send their wives, but we were just facing the reality of an unequal workforce, of course, also in the presentations. But this has massively improved, and we've continued to work on that. And I'm very proud to say that for now, we don't have to make all moderators female anymore, because we are reaching a much better gender balance also in our conference. But also let me use this opportunity to shout out to my female colleagues within POLIS who've been working hard to put this topic on the agenda in our sector. And the Just Transition Workforce, of course, a task force, of course, and workforce is really instrumental, looking at all these topics in the sector through this just transition lens, because also it's not just about women, it's about being inclusive and diverse across different segments of our population and our workforce.
Totally agree. And from my part, I will try to do the best to contribute, I would say. Still improving.
Raphael, maybe we can come to you about the electromobility sector, AVER, scale. What is really needed? What is AVER doing? What can we do in scale better to really push this question at the top of the agenda? What's not the question, this need, sorry.
Yeah, quite a broad question, quite a lot to do. Maybe let me start with AVER, what we're doing internally. So, you know, we're expanding a bit the team these days. And so as part of the recruitment process, for me, one of the key aspects has been really, you know, pushing to ensure that there is more gender diversity within our organization. Just for what I mentioned earlier, you know, having a diversified team brings, you know, creative ideas, and, you know, it's actually helpful for the association to grow, not just in terms of secretariat, but as a whole association, in terms of topics that we address, in terms of ideas that come, the way we organize things internally, but also the way, you know, we create events. Those are kind of aspects that, you know, I believe are key for an association. You know, that's why having a diversified team is essential. So we're, you know, in good track. We already, you know, hired two new women in our team. So I'm really happy about that for a small team like AVER. But, you know, there's still more to be done. And of course, it's not just hiring the people, it's also making sure that they stay. And so to make sure that, you know, women are well represented in our industry, I think there are some, you know, things that need to be done within the industry. And for that, it means, you know, setting up a good, let's say, team building, and by that it might seem weird, but some people, when we think about team building, they're like, yeah, let's go play football. And I'm like, let's have something that's going to, you know, work for everyone. Not to say that women don't like football, but to say that maybe some women don't and some men don't. So like, let's find something that's going to work for everyone, you know. And so how do we create a team building that works for everyone? So that's, you know, the number one. But then there are also aspects the job training, professional growth, we have to keep in mind what are the aspirations of women in there. We also have sometimes, women who are mothers. So how do we help them with, all the kindergarten aspect, all the, those aspects. We currently have a new employee. She's pregnant. So right now I'm, trying to see how can we make sure that we address that in a good way, and that, we create the space for her to be able to work within our association while still being able, to be a mother. So it's all those aspects that we have to take into consideration. So it's continuous growth, and I'm learning so much, and so that's also why I'm really happy to be here, because I think it's a discussion, and it's not just, as you said at the beginning, Juliette, it's not for women to lead the fight, it's for everyone to just have a discussion and make sure that we create the right professional space for everyone to grow. So that's for Avere. And then for Scale, what I like in Scale is that I think there are some motivated people in there, including Juliette and others who are bringing, some ideas to the forefront. And the question of gender equality has been definitely one that I think struck all of us during the first meeting. And there we started, working on, well, creating those kind of webinars, creating those kind of discussion within Scale, but also creating trainings. We're discussing the possibility to create trainings for women in the e-mobility. So how do we make sure that we promote, the gender diversity in e-mobility via European projects? That being said, I think there's way more to be done, and I think here the Commission has a role for future projects. To make sure that there's more gender diversity, or at least, encourage that consortium, bring that gender diversity aspect within new projects, because it's good to have research. It's good to push these projects. We're doing a lot, but I do think that there is also, the need for more horizontal policies. Gender diversity is not just a vertical policy. You just say, yeah, we're going to do gender diversity. You have to do it on all policy aspects. So it's a horizontal policy that the European Commission has to apply. So I think well, right now it's a bit late, but I think for the next, commissioner in charge of equality, there's quite a lot of work to be done across the industry. And maybe my last point, and then I'll stop because I talk a lot. But my last point about education, we mentioned it earlier. Indeed, it's kind of the chicken and the egg. We do need a greater representation in the e-mobility sector. We've inherited, a bit the gender imbalance of the automotive sector, but e-mobility is way broader than that. So let's, make the most of it, and let's make sure we're innovative as well in terms of social and gender diversity issues. But to do that, so we need the representation, but you also mentioned we also need the educational aspect. And here, we're going through such a transition in Europe. There's the question of creating net zero academies. In the Net Zero Industry Act, this is something that's being discussed to upskill and reskill the population to the need that we have, with the transition of the transport and energy sector. And I think through those new academies, the EU can do a lot in terms of promoting gender diversity. So yeah, I think let's take that opportunity and let's make sure that we live up to gender diversity, and that we reach a more sustainable and equal society.
Thank you, Raphael. So we're going to take Aphrodite's comments, and then I see some interesting remarks and questions in the chat. So we'll give the floor just following Aphrodite's.
Yes, totally agree with Karen and Raphael at the points they made previously, and especially I would like just to highlight that there are women in the sector. We are a lot in that sector. However, the responsibilities, as Karen said, that given to women are limited, and as the transport sector has unique challenges as it requires strong, if I can say that, multitasking skills compared, especially for the construction industry or something like that. I think that women can bring significant value to this sector. So the companies need to help women to get ahead, to get in front of men, and have more responsibilities than previously. So we are here, so we should work and go forward.
I think those are quite inspiring words, and yes, it's true, and women can bring this multitasking, this added value to the transport sector. And I was also a researcher, and I saw that it was actually this very much gender balanced. But when it comes then to the industry, something fails along the way. That's clearly there's clearly a gap, some hurdle that doesn't allow for this capacity and this knowledge and this added value to be translated to the upper, let's say, layers of the industry. But because of that, I also want to give the floor now to my colleague Juliette, because she wants to share some interesting findings, because all of this that we have discussed are actually addressed in this report.
Yeah. So before I give I'm gonna give Heather Allen the ability to speak, as it's called on Zoom. But before that, I'm just gonna quickly showcase some of the main findings of the report that I've been speaking about, some for which Heather Allen co-led or contributed a lot. So these, following 300 surveys, 23 interviews, and a lot of desktop research, these were the 5 main barriers that were identified that were sort of blocking or slowing down women to join the workforce, but also to grow, to get into leadership positions. And I think a lot of these were discussed today. So the first is gender stereotyping, the fact that the transport sector is seen as male-dominated, and it's not specifically something that young women think about when they're students or when they're making some career decisions. Then there's discriminatory work cultures, specifically in some modes more than others, and in some countries more than others. So this report takes a worldwide overview and looks at all modes, not just electromobility or road transport. Then there's lack of flexible working, invisible glass ceilings, and the link between gender equality and other wider diversity topics, which is like intersectionality and need for cultural change. What this report does fantastically, and I really recommend everyone to have a look, is that it looks at those barriers and tries to show action points, concrete action points that can be taken to reduce the impact, or to, reduce the impact of these systemic barriers with a lot of case studies, a lot of concrete examples. So yeah, really, if you want to learn more, I really recommend. It's on the Some4All website, or you can scan the QR code. Okay, going back to the conversation, I'm going to give Heather the ability to talk if she would like, because she made an interesting comment and I think she has a question. If you would like to ask it, you have the floor.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks so much. Thanks a lot also for highlighting that report, which I think was really groundbreaking, and I was happy to be part of it. I mean, one of the things we found was that what was being talked about this morning was very much, some were general issues with women working generally, but some were also very specific to transport. And I think that's what set this report a little bit apart. And so, stereotyping was a key aspect that came up. And my question is around on two levels, really. First of all, so e-mobility actually presents a fantastic opportunity for us to change the transport paradigm and to get more women involved. But what can we specifically do to make sure that that does change? And one thing that came from that report was that, if you want to have innovative thinking, then you need diverse teams. And that's something that women can bring. And it's not really yet being recognized. So, my question is around the policy level. So what recommendations could we make that would specifically help change the transport? We don't just want to adopt the ICE transport paradigm. What could we do to make sure that the e-mobility landscape and the whole ecosystem which supports it is more gender sensitive across the whole board, women, elderly, those who might not be quite so mentally or physically able. There's a lot of issues in there, and I think that there's a lot of interesting points that could be brought up and discussed, and I'd be really interested to hear about that. And one last thing, if anyone wants to give their opinions on how the current landscape is on gender and e-mobility. I am running a survey with a big international study funded by UNEP, and I'd be happy to hear from anyone, and I'll put the link in the chat if that's all right. So thanks for just allowing me to say that. But I do think it's a really interesting subject around specifically e-mobility questions.
Thank you for the kind words, Heather, and congratulations for the amazing work. I don't know if any of our panelists wants to, because those are strong questions, not easy to answer. But if anyone wants to have the courage to step and give a first overview, that would be great. Or maybe there's no answer to these questions.
Yes.
Maybe Raphael, you are our e-mobility, our strongest e-mobility representative.
I can also.
But Pedro also is.
I can also provide a little bit of a concrete example of another project where we are using the e-mobility as you said, the transition to better things, to better mobility. So the Solutions Plus project is one of the European funded projects where POLIS is involved. And it's actually one of the only one that has a global outreach. So we have pilots and demonstrations in Europe, Africa, Latin America, and Asia. And one of the use cases that was tested and was a success was how to work towards bringing more women to the paratransit, the informal transportation that we see sometimes in African cities. So there's this informal services of transportation by motorcycle. And what we saw was that women were very reluctant to be driven on these services because they were mostly driven by men and they felt insecure. So under the project, we did a training session for 31 women to get their driver's license, to learn how to use the electric scooters. And after that training, they kickstart their own companies. So they started working as mobility service providers. So they gained capacity, they gain a job, and actually they gain customers because other women feel much more comfortable on being driven by them. So I think it was a very, very nice, let's say, use case and test bed to show how e-mobility can, as you mentioned previously, e-mobility can be used to foster change, and how other regions, sometimes we are very much European focused, how other regions in the globe can actually teach us how to do things properly. So these were just my 2 cents because I want to give the floor to Karen.
Well, I don't have the answers to the very important points that Heather raised, but I do think that, as Raphael already mentioned as well, how Europe and European projects now are forced to think about diversity and to put it on the agenda, that this is really also important to further streamline the topic into our sector. And coming back to what Heather said and referring to the national level, I think this is indeed instrumental. We see not just within this topic, but in many other topics as well, that this cooperation between different levels of governance and government is really instrumental, and that also the national level can play a very important role in further empowering other levels and different sectors, both public and private, so that it doesn't remain indeed with individual initiatives of individual companies or cities or regions, but that it becomes more mainstream. And this could be done through recommendations, but also maybe even obligatory targets. And ultimately, it will also help the sector, because I think we all know how hard it is to recruit people these days. And it's also, when we look at the specific sector we are in, there's a massive shortage of bus drivers, for example, that we need to address, but also to become more competitive as an industry. It is important that we bring all talent on board. And I think there is a big responsibility for the national level indeed to encourage that and to address that. Coming back then to e-mobility in particular, when we look at micromobility, for example, we see there's also a lot of improvement possible in terms of making sure that the average user of micromobility devices is not just a young male urbanite. But what I think is very encouraging is that the sector, the startups, which are young, dynamic themselves, do pay a lot of attention in making sure that their users and the scope of their users is broadened, and that they also listen to what women find important in terms of using or not using these devices. And that makes me a bit optimistic as well, and I think aligns with what Heather also mentioned, that there are more women in some segments of this particular sector.
Thank you for the optimistic words. I totally agree. I have to say, the future should be brighter. There's no doubt about it. But Raphael, I also see that you want to add some remarks to this question.
Yeah, you summoned me earlier, so coming back to you on this point. Policy-wise, it's always a tricky one, of course. The one that we mentioned already, definitely in project, I think the question of conditionality of funding based on gender diversity will help. That's definitely, one. Of course, it's not always, achievable, but let's promote it at least. If it's not a condition, at least let's make it an encouragement, because I do think that there's a way to better promote that via project. At the company level, it's there's a lot of that will happen at the national level, I would say. But I think that at the European level, what's already kind of happening is a sort of top-down approach of making sure that the top-level management, the board of directors, have to be more diversified. And I think there's a legislation that's been discussed on this, and that's already promoting that 40% of board of directors will have to be women in the future. Right now, the only, let's say, downfall of this is that it's only covering companies that are and now I'm losing my word. I have it in French, but I'm losing it. En bourse, so that are, like, let's say,
They are listed.
Listed, exactly. Sorry, thanks. So I think it has to be more widespread, because e-mobility is still, I don't want to say a nascent sector, because far from that, we see big companies being listed that are e-mobility companies, but I do think that there are a lot of SMEs that are in the e-mobility sector that also need to make sure that we tackle the gender diversity question. And my last point is, and Karen mentioned it, there is a huge shortage of workers in certain sector. The bus driving one being one, truck driving as well is a huge issue. And it's not just we're missing women in the sector, we're just missing literally workers. And in the e-mobility sector, it's something that we see a lot. We have a huge need for skills, for people to be reskilled or upskilled, and so we do have a shortage of workers. So let's use this opportunity to actually bring more women in the sector. And to do that, one of the things that we see, so to come back to the truck driver shortage, one of the things that we see there is, in some countries, the lack of social rights for people. And so, like, if they don't have, let's say, the right incentives to join that company, or let's say for truck drivers, the knowledge that they will be able to come back to their family, or that they will have, enough holidays to actually spend time with their family or with their children. That's actually what's impeding, people to join that sector, because people are just, thinking, I'm just going to be on the road. So it's not interesting for me to join such a sector. Of course, the mobility sector is different, but we do have to think, what are the things that are slowing down people to join our sector, and how can we address it? And I think part of that will have to be linked with social right. But yeah, social Europe is a bit far, so let's it will have to be at the national level in a lot of initiatives.
Yeah, I have a final comment from my side. It's linked to everything that was discussed today, but in regards to electromobility and specifically passenger private electric vehicles, I feel that there's a lot of stereotyping, on who the users are, who are they designed, and in events, in meetings, in the commercials, in our imaginaries, we often see like a middle-aged white man. And I think the cars, the electric vehicle cars that are manufactured today are these expensive designer cars, and it like perpetuates this cycle. And I hear I hear some accidental sexist comments or stereotypes in meetings linked to passenger electric cars projects or developments. And this is something I never hear in, for example, I haven't heard in other modes or on projects where there's a much bigger gender diversity in the teams. So it's really something that's quite specific, I think, to cars and also to electric cars. It's an even higher degree of stereotyping. Like stereotyping.
It's the toys.
Yeah, it's seen
the
as this is a luxury good made for men, and I think it's still in users, in the workforce, in a lot of imaginaries. And I think if we can change that paradigm, and I don't say we should have more cars on the roads, but if we can make sure that people identify that this is something that it can be valuable for everyone, I think it would be something that would enable also the workforce to be more diverse and would gather more interest. That's my personal opinion from working on this topic.
I cannot disagree. I just wanted to add something also in relation to the future, especially how we see the political shift in Europe and how this might affect future initiatives and gender balancing the electromobility sector. Let's hope that what we are seeing now in terms of the political change does not reflect or results in regression in the way that we are doing and the small steps that we are giving. So hopefully we as a network of cities, of course, we will work with local elected and regional politicians. So we will try to bring, of course, a positive angle, but it's also part of our work. And Karen, I'm sure you do not disagree, to keep pushing for this agenda towards our members to see that, okay, even if you have a political change and a completely different approach, we can learn from each other. We can establish a common base.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming to this webinar. Thank you to our speakers for for participating. We'll be publishing a news item with the main findings or the main discussion points, with further resources on the Scale website, on POLIS website, on Scale LinkedIn. I've put all of those links above, so feel free to follow and stay in touch. We will have more events, discussions, news items on these questions, because it is critical and we really want Scale to contribute a little bit to improving and finding some answers to also have those questions. So thank you very much, and we wish you a wonderful end of day.
Have a nice day and have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.